Let me summarize the first passage before we look at the questions. I will read and summarize quickly. 3 years ago, Valley Fraser Selin adopted a blonde husky mixed puppy whom she named Husk. Fraser Celine soon started looking for ways to curb the husk's totally wild behavior, she says, such as stealing food from the kitchen counter and barking incessantly at strangers. Based on the advice of a YouTube trainer, Fraser Celine started using an electronic collar or an e-collar that delivered a small shock when the husk misbehaved. But she says she felt yucky about it. So her dog was a little uncontrollable when she got this pup, so she tried to train it to control it, and she used an electronic collar which would give a small shock whenever the dog misbehaved. But the owner felt very uneasy about doing that. Fraser Celine rethought her approach after hearing about an animal trainer who taught a grizzly bear to cooperate with medical treatment using only positive reinforcement. So the earlier one was punishment: you misbehave, I'll hit you, I'll give you a slight shock. She was not comfortable with that. Then she heard about an animal trainer who trained a bear, a wild bear. Okay, a grizzly bear is a wild, ferocious bear, and she taught a grizzly bear to cooperate with medical treatment using only positive reinforcement. That means rewards. If that hulking animal, if that big animal could learn with treats and praise, she thought, why were dog trainers using prong and short shock collars? If a huge bear can be trained with positive reinforcement and rewards, why use punishment for smaller dogs? That was the catalyst into my advocacy, says Fraser Celine, who studied African wild dogs for her PhD and now works as a remote community liaison for Winnipeg Humane Society. What's her advocacy? She advocates. Advocates means supports independently for positive reinforcement training for dogs on Instagram. This is what she does. All right, she supports positive reinforcement for training dogs. Fraser Celine is not alone. So she is given an example of one person, but he says she is not alone. Many researchers, trainers, and veterinary and training professional organizations are advocating for greater oversight, greater supervision. Oversight here means supervision for dog training, which is unregulated in many countries. So we need greater supervision and control in countries where dog training doesn't have any regulations, including the US, though they sometimes disagree on the best path of action and choose to focus on the research that reinforces their preferred approach. So they no countries including the US don't have too many regulations. So people who want greater regulation for dog training have some preferences. There are approaches, right? Do you train a dog with rewards or a positive reinforcement, or through small punishment, small or big? And these approaches people differ on, and so they support their form of training. Right now, it's the wild west. That means there are no regulations, no laws, no rules. Says a student at Arizona State University with a background in animal behavior and dog training. She recently published a study that analyzed the website of 100 highly rated dog trainers across the US. So she went to a website, she did a study of 100 highest rated dog trainers across the US, which found that most gave no indication whether the trainer had relevant education or certification. So when you are rating people, they're rating it on other criteria. The rating is not in terms of relevant education or certification of the trainers. Anyone can identify as a dog trainer. They can put up a social media page. They can offer services to the public. There's no expectations for their education, their continuing education, or their standards of practice. So anybody can become a dog trainer by putting up a social media page. They can offer services to the public, and they don't have to. People don't expect that they will show proof of their education, their continued education, or their standard of practice, says Bradley Pfeiffer, an executive director of the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, an organization that promotes science-based training standards. So there's an organization which says dog training should have scientific basis. People with little or no education in animal behavior may be advising owners on handling aggression. When you don't have regulations, you can have unqualified people uh, giving training. Some experts and organizations are pushing for greater regulation in the industry. Under an umbrella organization known as the Alliance for Professionalism in Dog Training, two major certification bodies have jointly proposed model legislation that they hope could be adopted on a state by state basis. So, some organizations have been formed which are trying to push for some sort of legislation on a state by state basis in America. The legislation would require trainer licensure by a state board. So there's uniformity in certification, create accountability standards, and require trainers to engage in continued education with new breakthroughs, research in the field. Whatever is there, you can upgrade your knowledge through continued education. But the push for regulation in the dog training sector has exposed a schism in the industry over using punishments versus rewards. So the when there have been a push for rules, regulations, some sort of a uniformity, that has given rise to or exposed a schism, a divide in the dog training industry. And over what is the schism? Rewards versus punishments. Under the proposed legislation, certifying bodies would be required to uphold a policy that prioritizes positive reinforcement. All these people say you should stress on positive reinforcement, but does not entirely rule out punishment uh, based approach, generally backed by research on the efficacy and welfare, and more popular among training professionals. They say, okay, rewards are fine, but it doesn't rule out punishment based approach, because they are saying that research shows that it's not that bad. Like it's based on efficacy, welfare, and it's very popular among training professionals. Although researchers and trainers largely agree on most points, they agree that punishment heavy approaches are harmful. They are at odds, they are divided about whether all out bans on aversive tools are productive. They say, okay, we should avoid punishment heavy approaches, but they are divided on the question. They're at odds, they have different opinions on the question of whether there should be a total ban on aversive tools, on punishment methods, because the approach may work in limited circumstances. Punishment based approach does work under certain circumstances. This is the passage. Which of the following best describes the purpose of the first paragraph? So we'll quickly go back to the first paragraph, that will be in the first slide or the first two slides, and then find out which one goes best with this. We know overall he's talking about dog training and about not enough regulations, no regulations being there on dog training, and how people are now pushing for reform, saying we need some laws which can be implemented on a state-wise basis about dog trainer certification, continued education. This push for legislation has brought out the divide, whether they all agree that heavy kind of punishment heavy training is bad, but they are divided on whether they should totally ban punishments, right? Because punishments are also effective and not really harmful for the dog. So some people say only positive reinforcement, others and ban it. The others would say no, totally banning it doesn't work. This is the main point. But he's asking, what is the purpose? Why has he written the first paragraph? So we'll go back to the first paragraph. If you remember the first paragraph, he's talked about the incident of this lady who tried to train her husky by using an e-collar, and she'd get very upset about it. And then she finds out about somebody who trained hears about somebody who's trained a grizzly bear with only positive reinforcement. And that's when she changed, and she said she started supporting positive reinforcement for training dogs. Okay. To highlight the exasperating experience of owning Husk, who was very wild, was the author exasperated, frustrated? She wanted to train Husk. She tried this method when one dog trainer advised her, but she was not exasperated, right? So, and it's not about that. to point out Celine's first brush with cruelty involved in the training of dogs. Was it the first time she came across the cruelty involved in the training dogs? In the training of dogs, was it cruelty? Does Celine call it cruelty? She said she felt very uneasy. But the word cruelty, has it been used? We'll go back to the passage and check. Not happy about the use of the word cruelty here. To introduce the topic of how to prevent the use of cruelty in dog training. Maybe how aversive tools are used. But did the author anyway say you have to prevent total use of cruelty? Are all aversive tools cruel? Again, the word cruelty is there. To describe the initial experience of a dog owner, in this case Celine, who used negative reinforcement during training. Very close to the answer, which we think is right. But let's cross check with the paragraph. Right? The first paragraph goes in the first two slides. First is value phrases Celine adopted, but even when you talk of this, she adopted a blonde husky mixed puppy whose behavior was wild, so she decided to train him. She started using an electronic collar on the advice of a YouTube trainer, and she felt very uneasy about it, and she rethought her approach after hearing about the grizzly bear. So what is the purpose of writing about a dog owner's initial introduction to dog training and how she advocated the other method, that is positive reinforcement? So what is the right answer? Purpose of the first paragraph: to describe the initial experience of a dog owner. On the advice of a YouTube trainer, she used negative reinforcement, and that experience left her feeling very yucky. It left a sour taste in her mouth. She felt it very distasteful. So what did she do? She then heard about the bear. So the first part is about her initial experience at using negative reinforcement. So my correct answer is D.